Yeah.
This roadmap, I'm just going to be going over the focus and all that. Let's first talk about the observation one, that we need to look to all aid. And the resolution that is to suspend all assistance. That means that in order to evaluate the round, the PROES approved that all types of assistance need to be taken away. Therefore, they haven't done this thus far, mainly because they haven't addressed a plethora of different civilian aid programs, and therefore, that is one of the key reasons that we're going to look to in the round. Moving to their first contention, they talk about nuclear proliferation, how Pakistan has 100 nuclear weapons. Okay, well, first of all, they don't give you any causal links to how US aid creates more nuclear weapons, or how US aid creates more nuclear proliferation. And more importantly, they also don't really give you any real impacts off of why that's bad. They say, for example, that one extra nuke makes an impact greater than $8 billion, for example. But there's no way to really weigh that first. There's no way to really weigh that. They talk about how this nuclear proliferation will create more danger. However, in the entire history of the world, since Nagasaki, there has been no use of nuclear weapons, and therefore, if this country is really using USA to proliferate, that really doesn't really have an impact, even if it's were true, because it doesn't have any, because it hasn't shown in any history to really amount to any negative impacts. Therefore, you're going to look away from that. Moving on, they talk about how the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been incredibly effective in solving nuclear problems. Well, that's fine. They don't give you any linkage to how suspending aid from Pakistan will make them sign this treaty. We suspended aid from Pakistan in 1992 for the explicit reason that they were conducting nuclear tests. And then they obviously weren't going to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so therefore why would it work again if we do it now in 2012? However, if we move on from that into the second conception, they talk about how you can see increases in insurgency because of the when looking into the Commonwealth, if we continue aid. They talk about, for example, how the United States is funding groups such as the Afghani Network or the Afghanistan Taliban. However, the main thing is that they don't give you any real proof of this actually occurring. For example, they don't give you any quantifiable figure, and there's no way to really know if the ISI is actually providing these funds to these various groups. However, you can also look to our second contention, in which we talk about how the Pakistanis are becoming more and more motivated to actually make military offensives. Whether it's moving more troops, the Brookings Institute describing on January 31st of this year how Pakistan has moved 100,000 more troops to the Afghanistan-Pakistan border crossing, or the fact that they've made numerous additional offensives, as we discussed, or how Pakistan continuously allows us to use drone strikes in northern Waziristan, which, as we've shown, has actually been very beneficial in attacking the Afghanistan Taliban, and why would they would support attacks on the Afghanistan Taliban if they were friends of the Afghanistan Taliban? They really don't show. So basically, the clear idea is they don't show you any real causal links that they're supporting these groups or impacting that as to how this hurts the United States, but moreover, we show you that they are moving into these terrorists. All right, now moving back to our side, we talk about supply lines, and they lay a plethora of attacks against this, but they all kind of shoot around our contention. They talk about how Pakistan is doing a variety of other things, which I addressed earlier, but they don't really talk about the supply lines in and of themselves. The only real argument there was that we would suspend it. But if we suspend aid, then Pakistan will cut these supply lines. Because these supply lines are so tenuous as it is, the only motivation they have to keep these open is the United States aid. If the U.S. were to take away this aid, they therefore close these supply lines. We'd have to rely on the northern distribution network. Impacts of this. As we've discussed in our case, it takes months longer to get there. It's more dangerous. We give influence to a variety of Central Asian republics, and we'd be increasing that influence because we'd lose the alternative in Pakistan. And then additionally, it costs far more money. Therefore, the United States sees a variety of negative impacts that both impact the war on terror as well as just U.S. efficiency at large. Moving on, we already discussed how the Pakistani military is increasing operations against the Afghanistan Taliban, against the Pakistan Taliban, and against a variety of military groups on that western border. But lastly, an argument that they really haven't touched is about the Taliban negotiations, and the fact that the United States, as we've proven to you, will need Pakistan absolutely to have negotiations with the Taliban. In order to make sure the war in Afghanistan has any chance of success, the Afghanistan government will have to have stable relations with the Afghanistan Taliban, and the only way to do this, as we've shown you, is that the Pakistanis have to be on our side. And if we cut aid, there's absolutely no reason as to why they would remain in any sort of way on our side of it.
All right. Do you mind if I have the first question?
Go ahead.
Is everybody ready? Okay. Let's talk about nuclear war. You advocate that we prove to you no link on why aid is going to increase, or why our aid is bringing, building more weapons, right? And you talk about how why is proliferation bad, right? Right. But how exactly does this address our first contention at all?
Well, your argument is, well, let me see if I understand your argument. Your argument is that USA is increasing nuclear proliferation, right?
No.
What is your argument then?
Our argument is that Pakistan's proliferating, we're aiding them in any way, shape, or form, and that's bad.
Why?
Because we cannot support a nation that proliferates. Like, why do we not support Iran? Why do we not support North Korea?
Because those countries act inherently against the United States' interests.
Because they're proliferating, right?
Well, I would say that's a part of it, but it's in terms of proliferation, again, but it's in terms of proliferation that we've already deemed like against.
Well, no, like the United States believes proliferation as a whole is always going to be bad. North Korea proliferates, Iran proliferates. Iran claims they're using it for civilian purposes, but they're developing their nuclear program.
But neither of these countries have anything that really outweighs these risks that we've shown you in these cases.
Exactly, but it's still our obligation to suspend aid, regardless of Iran's intentions.
Where is this obligation coming from? You talked about how the United States is like a nuclear hegemony.
Yeah.
Why is it that the United States, being the dominant power, has this moral obligation to solve the world's issues?
Because first, historically, the United States has set out an international declaration of international stability. Ever since the Cold War, the United States, along with many leading other nations, decided that proliferation is bad, that we don't want another Cold War, so sign the NPT.
But hasn't the United States, trying to act as like a policeman of the world, trying to promote global stability around the world, had several negative impacts against the United States?
Like what? That they are mad at us? Like, I mean, so far I can see that North Korea doesn't like us, Iran doesn't like us, but we don't want them proliferating, so we have to suspend aid.
But doesn't like the suspensions of aid, for example, A, not stop them, as you mentioned in your second speech,
I mean,
but B, it also makes it so that we create an enemy out of these countries that are proliferating?
I mean, that's fine if you're saying that all these bad things are going to happen, but it's like our obligation. I understand that Pakistan might cut supply routes, it might make our operations much more expensive, but that's a price we have to pay when we're trying to talk about nuclear peace.
But beyond that, like in terms of nuclear peace, right? You already admitted in your second speech that Iran and North Korea are both moving in this direction, despite the U.S. suspending aid. And instead, we just
this goes back to the argument in which I make at the very beginning of the case that obligation is exclusive to that of solvency. The same reason a fireman jumps into a burning building is the same reason we're going to suspend aid. Now, we can't ever prove to you that 100% if they're going to sign the NPT, but we're proving to you that we have an obligation to do so. Now, whether or not they sign the NPT is irrelevant because we're fulfilling this obligation. But moreover, when we're talking about solvency, the con doesn't actually respond to any of the arguments made in the rebuttal. I advocated that they're right now supporting terrorism. They're still proliferating. So how exactly is maintaining aid going to be a good thing besides saving a little bit more cash?
It isn't just the cash in the Northern Distribution Network specifically, it's also the efficiency of moving supplies. But outside of the Northern Distribution Network, in terms of saving lives, for example, it's also making sure that Afghanistan itself is stable with the negotiations with the Taliban.
Okay. So, as a brief roadmap for this speech, I'll basically be going over some major arguments we've seen in the debate, and we'll be starting at the top of the pro. Everyone ready? Okay. So at the top of the pro case, they drop our observation 1, which clearly states how they can't bring up evidence pre-2001 because it's in a different scenario. They bring up evidence stating that in 1992 they continued to proliferate. However, this is completely non-applicable because once again, the observation 1 clearly states that the scenario was different, i.e. basically the Soviet Union provided aid for Pakistan, so it completely changes the name of the game. Don't let them link back into this. Let's go to the first contention. So first they state that US aid does not increase in proliferation. So that's fine. That's not what we're advocating at all, and they completely misunderstood our argument. Our argument, once again, is that we have an obligation to stop a proliferating country, which is what we're doing. So let's go on to their next argument. They're saying that there will be no use of nuclear weapons, so there basically is no impacts. However, first, this is false. You see that they did not attack Taylor in 2001, which clearly states that even the possession or the proliferation of nuclear weapons is inherently bad. So extend Taylor 2001 across the flow because of that. Finally, they talk about how we suspended in the past, but just look at my observation 1. Because we suspended in the past when the Soviet Union was providing aid to Pakistan, this is completely not relevant to today's debate. Now, onto the second contention that we provide. They say that we have no link to how we're increasing terrorism. So, first, let's look at what the link is. America is increasing its presence within Pakistan. The terrorists are angered by this presence. Terrorists are killing civilians. The link is very clear. We give you causation and we give you the statistics to back it. So let's look at the major arguments of the round. First, let's look at impacts. Nuclear war is the biggest impact in the round, so even if you buy the fact that we're having to spend more money, since we're threatening the entire international community, that wins alone, so you must sign your ballot pro based on that. But then let's look at terrorism. We've already proved how we're increasing terrorism with our presence, so their entire case is turned against them. But finally, let's look at the obligation. The obligation is how we determine who the winner of this round is, because we have to determine how we give aid. So since we have an obligation to save the international community from nuclear war, we must vote pro.
If you haven't made any mistakes, I'll put you some rest.